Welcome to Geek Therapy Radio. You've got your mental curator, Johnny Hamburger. I've got kind of a fun show for you today. Not that the other shows haven't been fun, but anyways, let me just start with getting the credentials out of the way, with getting the plugs out of the way. Credentials? Why do I even say credentials? The plugs. You can find the Geek Therapy Radio podcast in your favorite podcast player. This is for anybody listening on the radio or watching this video if it goes up on YouTube. You can find Geek Therapy Radio podcast in your favorite podcast player, so Spreaker, Spotify, Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, iHeart Radio app, all that good stuff. Just type in Geek Therapy Radio or Geek Therapy Radio Podcast and look for the red, white, and black color scheme, and then you'll be good to go. The same thing for all social media: Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, TikTok, all that good stuff. Geek Therapy Radio or Geek Therapy Radio Podcast. The key is just to make sure you look for the red, white, and black color scheme, and that's how you know you've got me. So, speaking of YouTube, the topic for today, at least for this first segment, is camcorders. Do you remember the Video 8 camcorders and DV camcorders and VHS camcorders from the 70s, 80s, 90s, early 2000s? I'm on a camcorder kick right now, and I am going to upload this first segment to YouTube because I am recording it, on a Digital 8 camera. A Digital 8 camera that uses, of course, Sony's Video 8 cassettes or High 8 cassettes, but it records the signal digitally, and it gives you more resolution, which I know is kind of a funny thing to say in the year 2021, or to end off 2021, where we're all in 4K and HD and talking about 8K and editing and 12K and beyond. Digital 8, I think this camera that I'm using, which is the Sony TCR, I think it's TRV or TVR, I think it's TRV 350, shoots at about 400 lines of resolution, which is pretty good, if not 480 lines, as opposed to High 8, which I think did like 240 lines, and then Video 8, which is all using the same format of tape, I think it was down like 200 lines. Don't quote me on those exact numbers. If you're watching on YouTube, I will put the exact numbers up on the screen. But yes, I am recording right now with a Sony TCR TRV 350 Digital 8 camcorder and glorious 4:3 aspect ratio. So if you want to see what that looks like in the year 2021, head to the Geek Therapy Radio Podcast YouTube channel, and you can see what I'm doing. I'm uploading this in 4:3. So if you're a lunatic like me and still have a 4:3 CRT hooked up to any of your computers, you can see behind me, I've got a CRT back here. It's just an old tube TV. It's an Emerson. How big is this TV? 20-inch, something like that, TV that I've got routed into my laptop in a special way. I've got it going through actually a VGA converter. So I have a Type-C hub that has all these outputs on it. So HDMI output, one of the outputs is VGA. And I've got it going out through a VGA adapter to an S-Video wire going into the back of this TV. Off camera, if you're watching this on YouTube, you can't see right now, but I have the actual computer CRT, the HP Pavilion M70 over here. It's running at 1024 by 768. It looks wonderful. And that's kind of one of the points I wanted to get to in this segment. By proxy of geeking out currently about camcorders that we grew up with in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s, by proxy of geeking out about that, I've been geeking out recently about CRTs and getting the full experience. And here's the thing I want to kind of point out about this. And maybe I brought it up on the show before. I've had the show since 2017, so I might have touched on it at any point in the last 200 or 300 episodes. But there's this misnomer that CRTs and old tube TVs, the image looks terrible, it's bad quality, and thank God for high definition and flat screens and everything, which is true. High definition, it's higher definition, it's more clear than CRTs were, but CRTs are not as bad as you remember them to be at all, especially computer CRTs that are running at high resolutions and high refresh rates. They look amazing. And the reason that gamers, pardon me for clearing my throat, the reason why gamers like CRT monitors is for the zero input lag. Usually there is no video processing going on to the image you see on a CRT monitor, whether it's a CRT TV or a CRT computer monitor. It's just straight from the device, straight from the console, straight from the computer to the cathode ray tube displaying it on the monitor. And there's really no native resolution the way you have native resolutions in a matrix, in a pixel matrix on a flat screen TV. So almost any resolution you throw at a CRT looks great. I think the misnomer as to why in the 21st century, in the year 2021, we think that, old Nintendos look bad and Super Nintendos look bad and everything. It's because the most recent memory I think a lot of us have with those systems is hooking them up to modern, IPS or LCD or plasma flat screen TVs, and then having the image look terrible on an HD TV. So that's the last kind of thought we have. Oh, I hooked up my Super Nintendo to my modern 1080p or 4K TV and it looked like trash. Through the composite cable into the TV, it looked like trash. Well, of course it looks like trash. That's not the best connection, and it's not running anywhere near native resolution. If you hook up your old game console or even a modern computer to an old CRT at native resolution for like an old TV, even though I said there's not really native resolution, it's basically like 480i or 480p for these old monitors. If you hook up that old game system to an actual old TV that was designed for it, I guarantee you will be quite surprised with how good it actually looks. You'll say, I don't remember it ever looking this good. Well, again, because the last memory you had with it was hooking it up to a flat screen TV. More Geek Therapy Radio coming up. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Geek Therapy Radio. You've got your mental curator, Johnny Hemberger. If you're watching this on YouTube, I got out of the first segment kind of quick, so I'm going to continue on here with the second segment. And if you're listening to the radio, same thing. I ended the first segment a little bit abruptly, and we'll just continue on with the conversation. I just wanted to just briefly kind of summarize what I was saying earlier, that standard definition televisions, if you looked at one right now, like in modern day, here's a good plug. These people don't even sponsor the show. So one of my favorite stores in Houston, one of my favorite stores in the entire world, is a place called EPO. It's on Fondren Road. It's just it's close to West Park Tollway, West Park, and all that good stuff. EPO, Electronic Parts Outlet. I'll include links in the podcast description or the video description. One of my favorite stores in the world is EPO, and they have tons of. It's candy for geeks. I mean, you can get everything from a high voltage transformer from 1950. You can buy. They showed me, Chris over there showed me a TV from the early 1940s with a round CRT. So it's got like a square glass, but behind it is a round CRT. I don't know if I'm hitting anybody's ears right now who remembers when TVs used to be black and white and round. The actual tubes were round. What we think of for TVs is what's right behind me in the video here, like a 20-inch cathode ray tube, 20-inch CRT monitor here from like Emerson or Sony or Sanyo or Samsung or whatever, with antenna inputs and cable inputs and composite inputs, and if you're lucky, S-video inputs, and if you're really lucky, Holy Grail component inputs, or even a VGA input. We remember these glass square TVs, but in the early days, in the 1940s would have been the early days of television. I think television was introduced at the 1939 World's Fair. So they had one of these. It was a Motorola. It was a Motorola from the early 40s, and it was at EPO, Electronic Parts Outlet. And what I'm getting at is, if you don't remember, if you have a bad memory of what televisions used to look like, CRTs used to look like back in the day, I promise you, if you look at one now, you're not going to sit there saying, well, I'm going to switch out my 70-inch 4K TV for one of these things. No, you're not going to do that. Obviously, content at 4K, recorded at 4K and edited in 4K is going to look the most crisp and sharp and vibrant with HDR and everything like that. That's the best picture we have yet known to man. All I'm saying is, if you go back and look at an old CRT, you're going to say, I don't remember it looking this good. It's going to kind of surprise you that, oh, it's not as bad as I think. Same thing, I think, with cassette tapes. And I know this has opened a bag of worms, and I know I have a few listeners that are into cassettes the way I am. I'm looking at one of my Sony 3-head cassette decks over here. When people listen to cassette, like a well-recorded, Type 2 cassette that was recorded on a good deck, like a good Sony deck or a good why am I blanking out? Nakamichi? What am I? Nakamichi Dragon? Nakamichi? Why am I blanking out on the actual name of it? But a good quality tape, more importantly, recorded on a good quality deck. If you play it back to back with a CD and a cassette tape, depending on the program material, depending on what kind of music you're listening to, at the very minimum, you'll say, I don't remember cassettes sounding this good. I don't remember the cassettes ever sounding this good. Because, again, I go back to kind of our childhoods and how we grew up, and maybe not even our childhood, depending on how old you are and your last experience with cassette. What we remember, what I think most people remember about cassettes in particular, is trying to, tune into the Buzz, which is right now 94.5 The Buzz here in Houston, but it used to be, remember when it was 107.5 The Buzz way back in the day? Or tuning into Sunny 99.1 or to a competitor, KRBE, something like that, whatever. You're waiting for the DJ to shut up so that you can hear your song come on, and you're just kind of hoping that the DJ wouldn't talk too much over the intro, because what you wanted to do was to have your cassette in your boombox and just hit record on the radio and record your songs off of the radio onto cassette. And that's what we remember. That's what we remember cassettes sounding so terrible compared to compact discs that would come later on, and now digital streaming and all that good stuff. But our experience with cassettes was just that, recording with a crappy boombox, usually a very crappy boombox, recording stuff off of the radio. So of course you weren't ever giving that cassette the best shot, but that was the easiest way to record on cassette, and that's what most of us had experienced. I would say few people back in the day would have put not few people, because my dad was one of these people that did put a lot of energy into recording good, high-quality cassettes. He would buy Type 4 metal cassettes, which you can go on eBay right now and look for Type 4 cassettes and be paying $20, $30, $40 for a blank cassette modern day. Like, it's crazy how much metal tapes, and I've got like 60 metal tapes in a box. I feel very lucky. But my dad put a lot of energy into recording high-quality content to cassettes. He also had a satellite dish, like a 15-foot satellite dish in the backyard. So he would tune into like Stevie Ray Vaughan live from Tokyo and basically record those concerts. I have so many concerts of Stevie Ray Vaughan in particular performing around the world that were never ever released. But since my released publicly, like they were never put onto tape, they were never released as albums, they were never put on best ofs or anything like that. So I have got so many concerts from around the world, Germany and Japan and South America and everything, Stevie Ray Vaughan, recorded with an amazing 3-head tape deck, the same one I've got over here, the Sony, I think a TC, what is it, 615S, something like that. It's a really good tape deck, recorded on the metal tape, and it sounds phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. It sounds like you're watching a live broadcast right there. Back in the day, you had your hi-fi system. It sounds amazing. So if you play back a high-quality cassette, or even, I would even say a high-quality cassette, even a Type 1 cassette, definitely a Type 2, even a Type 1 cassette that has been calibrated, you've got the bias set just right, you've got the recording level set just right, and you are hitting just like the maximum saturation that the tape can take before distorting. Even on a Type 1 tape, and you play it back for somebody right now through a good set of speakers, they would be floored. They will be blown away. And they wouldn't say that. Some people might say, oh, this sounds better than a CD, or this sounds better than whatever. That's subjective. I'm not getting into that. But most people would be absolutely floored with how good even a Type 1 cassette sounds when recorded properly. But again, going back to what I started at the beginning of the segment, that wasn't our last experience with the technology. For most people, that wasn't our last experience with the technology. It wasn't going over to a buddy's house who was a nerd or a geek about this kind of stuff and listening to a high quality recorded audio on a cassette tape. Our last experience was just that, being 12 years old, 15 years old, whatever, listening to 107.5 The Buzz with our crappy Sylvania or whatever boombox that we got at Walgreens for $30 that had a tape mechanism in it, and getting the same, bumming a cassette that's been recorded 100 times and popping it into the cassette deck there, waiting for the DJ to stop talking and hit record on the thing to make a mixtape, recording a crappy FM. It's not a crappy FM signal. The FM signal isn't crappy inherently in itself, but running through terrible equipment. Basically, the signal chain between the song playing on the DJ's console and you recording it through your crappy boombox to tape, it was a very crappy, cheap signal chain. And that's why most of us remember back to this kind of older technology thinking it was pretty crappy. It sounded pretty crappy. It looked pretty crappy. Well, our last experience with it wasn't great. It wasn't set up properly. So as you can see here, I'm still recording this segment too. I'm going to put the first two segments at least up on the YouTube channel. And I've been recording the entire time with a Sony Digital8 camera. Granted, I just want to mention on the way out here that Digital8 and DV are the same thing. So if you had a mini DV recorder or a DV recorder or a Digital8 recorder, they both had FireWire ports, and it was the same exact codec. And you could dump it easily to your PC and edit from there. Anyways, more Geek Therapy Radio coming up. Who knows what I'm going to talk about? I might continue with this. More Geek Therapy Radio coming up. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Geek Therapy Radio. You've got your mental curator, Johnny Hemberger. I just wanted to mention something real quick. Of course, I'll plug this stuff again because we're beginning the third segment. I don't know where I'm catching you in your drive or if you're at home just tuning into the radio, but just a reminder, you can grab the Geek Therapy Radio podcast in your favorite podcast player. So Google Podcast, Apple Podcast, I like to use Pocket Cast and the iHeartRadio app, Spotify, all that good stuff. Just type in Geek Therapy Radio Podcast, or just type in Geek Therapy Radio, really, or just type in Geek Therapy into the search and we'll start bringing things up. Make sure you subscribe to the red, white, and black color theme. So when you see Geek Therapy Radio in any of your favorite podcast players or outlets, just make sure the color scheme is red, black, and white, or any combination thereof, and that's how you know you've got my Geek Therapy Radio. Also, the social media, Geek Therapy Radio, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, TikTok, all that good stuff. And the exact same thing applies. Red, white, and black color scheme. That's my Geek Therapy Radio. So I just wanted to mention real quick, at least at the beginning of this segment here, that I ended the last segment in the first segment talking about, old recording media, whether it's video or audio, wasn't as bad as I think most people remember it to be, because their most recent experience with that old media was using crappy equipment to play it back on, or improper equipment if we're talking about video. So hooking up an old Nintendo 64 or a PlayStation or a Super Nintendo or whatever to your new 4K TV is going to look terrible. It's going to look garbage, and the input lag usually is going to be pretty bad unless you go through a bunch of settings and everything like that, because those systems were never designed to look the best on 4K. Adds a bunch of signal processing. There's not a lot of thought that goes into the composite video inputs of these new modern, 1080p, 4K, 8K televisions, whatever you have. It's not native. It doesn't look good. But when you plug in an old system like an N64, PlayStation, or an NES or whatever into an old CRT TV, most people, at the very minimum, say, I don't remember it ever looking this good. Yeah, because now you're using it on actual equipment it was designed for. So going back to the audio, I just spent the last segment talking about how, at the very least, somebody who hasn't experienced an audio cassette in a while, if they listen to a properly recorded audio cassette on decent equipment, at the very minimum, they'll be blown away that they don't remember it ever sounding this good. because like I mentioned, their most recent experience with it was recording, songs off of the radio with a crappy boombox and not a crappy cassette tape necessarily, could be a crappy cassette tape, but their experience wasn't good. That if you actually gave the medium a shot, like if you gave even a Type 1 cassette a shot by putting it into a good deck and recording a good source and calibrating the tape just right, which a lot of these decks calibrated automatically. Sorry about these clearing the throats. I know it annoys some people. That if they listen to it that way, they would be blown away with how good it sounds. They don't remember it ever sounding that good. So an example of this, a very minor example of this, is that if you go back through my catalog of podcasts, everything I record on the radio, I think there's maybe 1 or 2 shows that aired that didn't go to podcast because whatever I was talking about, I didn't think fit the ethos, or I was just feeling a little bit testy or spicy that day, and I didn't want to, I don't know, didn't feel like it deserved to be in a podcast. We all have those days. So anyways, if you go back through the podcast history, you'll see that I've recorded quite a few episodes that have gone to air on cassette tape, on Type 1 cassette tape, on Type 2 cassette tape. If you just go back through the listen, like read the descriptions and titles, you'll see, oh, this one's recorded to cassette tape. And then you listen to it like, wow, this sounds way better than I ever imagined. Yes, it's been converted to digital, but that doesn't have anything to do with being able to hear the effects of analog tape. Not in the sense that I'm meaning here. So there is an episode that I just typed into I upload everything. Spreaker is my distributor, basically, through the radio station. I kind of wish I could get my own independent account and get distributed, like join another. I'm not biting the hand that feeds me. I'm certainly not biting iHeartRadio's hand, but like, so there are outlets that I just think Geek Therapy Radio would be, I hate to use the word better served. And I really don't mean for that to sound biting the hand that feeds me, but iHeart it's a big umbrella that covers a lot of different genres and demographics, versus if I was under the umbrella of just a tech or just a geek kind of distribution network, it would fit, I think, a little bit. It would serve us a little bit better. If you haven't noticed, I don't exactly toe the line of this specific radio station. I have nothing against people's outlooks, and really, I'm getting on a side tangent here. I want to do a quick shout out and thanks, especially to one demographic of people. And honestly, and this might offend some of you listening to the podcast or whatever, but the group of people I want to thank the most right now for putting up with me because I don't toe the line of this station necessarily, I want to thank conservatives for putting up with it. I'm not saying I am or am not conservative. I'm not saying I am or am not liberal. Anybody can make up their own mind about me, whatever. I'm my own individual. I have my own independent thoughts and in consideration. So you can label me whatever you want to label me. That's not what I am, but label me whatever. But specifically, so I'll give you an example of this. Anybody who's listened to me for a while knows my thoughts and opinions on like renewable energy, and going back to last year or early this year, actually February in the freeze, where this station, almost every host on this station blamed the power outages on windmills and solar panels and stuff, completely oblivious to the fact of actual numbers and science and data that windmills and renewable energy only accounted for a few 100,000 people being without power. The grid, Texas grid, is fossil fuels, and that makes up the other 80, 85, 75% most of the grid. And that counts for the other 5 million people that went without power. So the windmills caused a drop in the bucket of people to go out without power compared to the actual whole system that's based on fossil fuels and natural gas. The whole thing went offline. It wasn't renewable energy's fault. But me having that opinion, me simply stating scientific facts, me simply being objective and using science in an argument, that doesn't toe the line of this station, and I understand that. So I want to thank the more opinionated conservatives. Let's put it that way, because I have a lot of friends and family and people who I love that are very opinionated, very far right leaning conservatives. Exactly like I have a lot of friends who are equally as kind of off base in my mind that are far left liberals. I've got friends all over the place, but right now I want to just, say thank you for far-right conservatives for putting up with me, basically. Y'all have been, because some of you are listeners and you talk to me and you email me and we have good conversations. I just huge props, because I don't think a lot of people realize that, yes, they have strong opinions, but they have families, they love their families, they have hobbies, they're geeks about things. And it's not this, if we just came to sit at the table and talk about geek things, it's kind of the whole ethos of the show, that we'll find out we have a lot more in common than politics. So thank you to far-right conservatives who listen to the station, who know that I don't toe the line necessarily for the station. Thank you for putting up with me and engaging with me and even listening to me from week to week and even emailing me and being a fan of the show and a fan of me. And it's really easy. Sometimes they say, I disagree with you on a few things, but overall I like your show, like your content. And I love that. That's such, I think that gets lost in all the bickering and all the shouting that happens on this station and other stations in this cluster that are very one-way minded, I'll just say. We get lost that we are just human beings, and we can relate to people that we disagree with. There are people, for example, in my life, and I'll get back to cassettes in a second, there are people that I vehemently disagree with politically, but I would still want in my foxhole, so to speak. That I would still, if it hits the fan, FCC, I didn't say the S word, if it hits the fan, I want this person beside me, fighting with me. And I have friends like that on both sides of the political aisle. So my love and respect for somebody has absolutely zero to do with political leanings or how brainwashed MSNBC has made them or Fox News has made them. Nothing. When you strip that away, it's human beings. And by and large, most human beings are just good people that relate to each other. And they can have a civil disagreement and not hate somebody. I don't understand this concept of unfollowing people and trying to cancel people because you disagree with their opinions or they said something. They made a mistake. Just right off the bat, immediate responses to cancel people or eliminate people from your life because you disagree with them. I don't understand that. I would have no friends at all. I would have no friends and no family if I eliminated people from my life that I just disagreed with. So, shout out to everybody who listens to Geek Therapy Radio who may disagree with me from time to time, or who may have noticed that I don't necessarily toe the line theologically and politically for this station. So I love you all. Thank you very much. No matter who you voted for, we love Star Wars and Star Trek and video games and techie equipment and cameras and TVs and building things and working with our hands and classic cars and all sorts of stuff. Doesn't matter the politics. We all love those things, and we can all bond over those things. Anyways, more Geek Therapy Radio coming up. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Geek Therapy Radio. You've got your mental curator, Johnny Hamburger. So we've been talking about audio cassette tapes, and yes, the last kind of half, at least last half of the last segment, I went off. I won't call it a tangent. It was a tangent, but I meant it, and it's a theme that I kind of bring up from time to time on this show. That I know where I stand on the station. I know where my show is, and it's never, ever, ever, ever going to be at drive time. It's never going to get increased hours at a better time slot during the week. Like, I'm not coming on after Jesse Kelly or Kenny Webster. I'm just not good. There's no way that is ever gonna happen while the sun is up Monday through Friday. I don't toe the line for the station. It doesn't mean I disagree 100% with everything that my co-host and friends, they are friends. I know them very well, and I even do parodies sometimes for some of their shows. They are friends, but I'm not going to be as inflammatory as they are. I don't play the game. I don't play the radio game. And since I don't do that, and I keep using the term toe the line, that means you're never going to hear Geek Therapy Radio at, an ideal kind of prime time spot. You might hear me on their shows if there's a particular subject coming on. Like if Kenny calls me up one day, he's like, dude, this thing happened with Facebook, or this happened with some sort of tech thing, or SpaceX is doing whatever. Do you want to come on and talk about it? Yeah, of course I'll talk about it. And Kenny knows me. These hosts know me, and they know where I stand. So, but it's all love, and they know that I'm not going to... they're not going to rope me into a political conversation, because they know if I do, then I'm going to voice my own opinion, and it's maybe not going to be what sells ad space on this station. I'll just say it's just the way it works. I'm not saying it's a good or bad thing. It's just the way it works. You have to play the game if you want to have any level of success in radio. And that was never my intention for starting the show. I never thought or believed that Geek Therapy Radio would be this kind of nationally syndicated show and be like the Rush Limbaugh of geek and tech. No, I just wanted to have an outlet, a creative outlet, and I knew there were going to be like-minded people out there. I do think the show would do well 5 days a week at a better time slot, at night or something, like alongside of Coast to Coast AM on 740. That if my show aired during that time slot on 950, that people would bounce it forth between commercials and see what I'm talking about, see what George Norrie or Knapp. Who does is it Knapp? Chris Knapp? Who's the host? Who does more of the shows now? Is it? I hope George Norrie still do. I haven't listened to it in a while. And you might be like, oh, Johnny, you work for the radio station. Why haven't you listened to Coast in a while? Coast to Coast AM, by the way, let me just tell you this. Coast to Coast AM is what got me into radio. It's what sparked this desire inside me to have my own radio show. You might think, oh, your dad was in journalism. Your dad was on the radio and TV. Maybe he got you into it. No, absolutely not. My dad told me, please, for the love of God, don't get into the media. Please, please don't get into it. I want you to have a future. Do not try to make a career out of radio. It's not going to work. That wave is over. So it was Coast to Coast AM that got me into radio, and I've had George Norrie on my show a couple times. George Norrie's great. Before the pandemic hit, I was supposed to help Coast to Coast AM host a panel here in Houston. I was like at the Hobby Center. It was a big deal. The producer of Coast to Coast AM called me up. I thought it was a prank call. He's like, hey, we have the show that we take on the road to different theaters and venues, and we're coming to Houston, and we want you to MC and sit with us for our Coast to Coast live show, for our live, production and meet and greet and whatever it was. It's like, absolutely, that's awesome, because it'd be great exposure for my radio show and everything. But then the pandemic happened and everything was canceled. And but Coast to Coast AM is what got me into radio. And I just thought, it would be cool if Geek Therapy Radio kind of sat, on the sister station next to Coast AM. Can I tell you something real quick? I pretty much said what I wanted to say about CRTs and cassettes and old camcorders. I do have an SVHS Panasonic AG456 on the way from eBay, but I'll dig into that once I have it. But I just wanted to say, in regards to radio and what got me into radio, I always thought that me being on the sister station next to Coast AM would just work great. And because Coast to Coast AM got me into radio, I haven't been able to listen to it recently because I have a baby. And man, past 9 p.m., it's like, I'm 38 years old, and I know a lot of listeners can kind of relate to this who have kids or, have had kids or whatever. I don't understand. Like, I think back to my 20s and maybe early 30s and teens and stuff like that, and just staying up to sunrise every day. Going out to the I didn't club that much. That wasn't the type of person I am, but I would go out and have a good time with friends, and we'd be up drinking and having a good time until 4 a.m. whatever, like nothing, and then wake up the next morning, a few hours later, and then do a road trip to Austin and go camping the next day. Like, I can't fathom now being 38 years old with a child. It's like, pardon me for cursing here, who the hell is up past 10 p.m.? It's inconceivable to be up past 10 p.m. To me right now, I was like, how did I do that when I was younger? How the heck did 2 a.m.? Are you kidding me? A bar closes at 2 a.m.? Who is still there till 2 a.m.? And then I'm like, I used to be there until 2 a.m. to closing time. They turn on all the lights and like, oh, this person I'm talking to isn't. Turn the lights back off. Oh, dear Lord. I won't get into that. Anyways, Yeah, I haven't listened to Coast to Coast AM in a while because who is up past 10 o'clock? I'm an old person now with a kid. But I did want to say this before I got off on that little sidetrack. There used to be a show on KTRH. I don't know if y'all remember this. And I'm probably going to piss some people off who like the show. It was called Ground Zero, right? Wasn't it Clyde Lewis? Was that the host of it? Ground Zero. I only worked on the show for years and years and years. I hated that show. This is me editorializing. This is just my opinion. That show was, and if it's on any other stations or affiliates in Houston, I have no idea. I hope not. But around the country, that show's terrible. Clyde Lewis is a bad host. He's a bad, he shouldn't be, and it might be cat calling kettle black. I know I'm not the best host in the world. Like I said, I don't play the game. I don't play this corporate radio game. I'm going to do what I do. I'm going to talk about geeky stuff and DSLRs and old Digital 8 camcorders and SSDs and video games and cassette decks. That's just what I'm going to do. So I know Clyde Lewis has been hosting radio and has been a host for 25 years, but I have such a chip on my shoulder for that show. And it's one is that he would do stuff on that show that was just, I would roll my eyes and just want to barf. Like, are you kidding me? Be crying. Oh, there's a ghost spirit here. I'm crying. So he was crying. Gosh, shut up. You're you're a faker. I'm not even if there was a ghost next to you, just the way you're coming off, the way you're selling it is god awful. It's so grating and so pretentious and stupid. And that's not even the reason why I hate the show. It was from a producer standpoint. I would have to email the show every once in a while. I shouldn't have ever had to email a nationally syndicated show. I shouldn't have ever had to email them even once. But they would play like EAS tones in the bumper, and I'd be emailing the producer like, "Hey, bro, I just played 2 minutes of commercials over the entire first part of your segment because y'all idiots were playing EAS tones in your bumper music. And, God help all the stations in automation that played those EAS tones and now have hell to pay the next day from the FCC. Who's running the ship? Your show sucks and it's produced horribly and you're doing illegal things to nationally syndicated show that's affecting affiliated automated stations. The whole thing was just a train wreck. It was horrible. And we're done. Thank you for listening to Geek Therapy Radio. You are worthy of love. See you next time. If you'd like to sponsor Geek Therapy Radio, just go to geektherapyradio.com and let's talk.